That's very different from when I came back from Vietnam. And we Vietnam vets still welcome each other home. And we did not have a community of discourse where we could talk about these things. And I am concerned, like Celeste, about the 53% of the folks who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq who are in the reserve component of the United States military, who come back to neighborhoods that don't understand, and they too lose that entire community of discourse. And some of the people who are going to speak after we have the intermission will be able to tell you something about what that experience is and how lonely it can be to live with the ghosts that you can't even name, and to live with something grabbing your throat and not letting even a cry come out. I was fortunate when I went out of Vietnam. I went out of a helicopter at 150 feet, and I broke both my arms real badly. The pilot made an error and lost the high-tension rotor, and without that it goes like this. And the pilot said, when he saw his altimeter at about 175 feet, "Oh my God, there goes my chaplain." The fall wasn't bad, but the sudden stop broke me up pretty badly. But I was able to go to a hospital, and in that hospital I could talk to other veterans. And I was the only chaplain at the Naval Hospital who had seen combat, so they wheeled me down with both arms in casts, and I could go on the orthopedic wards and on the amputee wards and talk to some soldiers. And the kind of confessions of faith I heard there are not the kind of confessions of faith I hear in most churches. "Chaplain, your boss is good to you." And that won't stand up too much in front of the consistories of my own church. But I went home to Grand Rapids periodically to heal and to mend. And when I went home, even though I was with my wife and a young son who was born while I was in Vietnam, I found it very difficult to talk about what I had experienced. And I sensed the real dread of loneliness because I had lost the community that understood what I had gone through. And so one of the things that I hope we can do at this conference is that our conscience can be stimulated too, to remember those who have served in these wars, who go back to a kind of loneliness and isolation, and we have a government that has not paid enough money to take care of hospitalizing and treating people who are suffering from traumatic brain injury, from PTSD. And when I retired in 2002, I took a job as the director of chaplaincy ministries for my church. And I began to listen to the stories of my military chaplains who were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they were the trigger to once again have me bad nightmares, get angry with my wife, and my marriage suffered for that. And to have to admit that I needed to go back to counseling and needed to go back and have some medication to take care of PTSD. And I'm working with some people who are looking at PTSD to see if we can find any neurological and physiological grounds for this disease. Because maybe if we can make it physiological and neurological and not only psychological, we can remove some of the stigma, and so that people will go and try to get the kind of help they need. I became concerned about selective conscientious objection right after I was released and discharged from my enlisted time and went to seminary. And a bunch of good chaplains had convinced me that I should come back in as an Army chaplain, so I let everybody know that I was going to go back in as an Army chaplain. And Dr. Staub, who was my professor of ethics, said, "Herman, I'm going to be your tutor on just war." because you're not going to be a combatant and you're not going to have to face the possibility of taking another's life. And I think you got the kind of gonads that you can accept the fact that you might get killed. But you have to be able to listen to the stories of people who are going to struggle by being combatants in war. And so the good doctor tutored me and schooled me in the history of the just war tradition. And he also moaned the fact that the position that our church had taken since 1939 of selective conscientious objection was not something that the government of the United States supported, nor were they protecting the kind of conscience that Dr. Staub and the rest of my church was trying to plant. When I got into the military, I discovered that almost every soldier, sailor, Air Force, Marine, and Coast Guard's person has schooling on the just war theory and the international laws of land warfare. And it struck me as kind of ironic that we would teach our service members and leaders of our service members in just war theory and in the laws of international warfare and try to educate their conscience about war, and then to deny protecting that conscience that we educated. I think that is criminal. Dr. Staub took me through, and one of the things we talked about was the fact that the just war theory was moving from a religious basis to a more human rights basis as a result of the Declaration of Human Rights from the United Nations. But we also noted that the peace churches won their status after much suffering and much persecution by sticking very closely to their confessions and the doctrines of their faith community. And we also noted that the just war churches had not made as powerful or cogent as argument because most of the wars that we had fought were wars that were not very contentious and could easily be justified as just wars. But then Vietnam came along, and I graduated seminary in 1968, so the chaos about the war was beginning to increase. And I asked myself, and I talked with Dr. Staub, should I really go into the chaplaincy at this point when there's going to be so much turbulence about conscience on the part of the soldiers? And he says, Herman, I haven't spent all this time with you for you to duck what God's calling you to do. And so I took my oath of office, and I went to Fort Gordon, Georgia, and then within 6 months, I was in Vietnam.